I never liked gatherings at my sister-in-law's house. From the outside, everything looked polished. White picket fence, neatly trimmed hedges, fresh flowers on every table. But beneath the surface, it was always the same: forced smiles, sharp whispers, and invisible lines you were expected not to cross. The retirement party for my brother-in-law, Martin, was no different. We arrived right on time, me and my son, Noah, his small hand slipping into mine, the way it always did when he felt nervous. My husband, Darren, was already there. He'd left early to help set up, though I knew better than to believe that meant anything useful. Inside, the house buzzed with chatter. Laughter from the kitchen, the clink of glasses. I spotted Darren across the room, laughing with Martin near the makeshift bar. I caught his eye. He gave me a tight smile, the kind you give someone you don't want to deal with right now, and turned back to his drink. I swallowed the hurt and moved through the room, smiling where expected, nodding when polite. "You made it," said Diane, my sister-in-law, appearing at my elbow with her wine glass. "I wasn't sure you'd come, after everything." I didn't ask what everything meant. I just smiled tightly and murmured something about babysitters being expensive. She leaned in, breath heavy with Chardonnay. "You know, sometimes it's better to stay home if you don't really belong." It was like being slapped, except worse, because it came with a smile. Noah tugged my sleeve. "Mom," he whispered, "can we go soon?" I knelt to adjust his collar and whispered back, "Soon, sweetheart." I stood up just in time to hear my husband's voice boom over the crowd. He raised a glass. "To Martin, a man who built a career and a family without dragging anyone down." The room laughed. I caught the sideways glance Darren shot at me, and my stomach twisted. Another small tug on my hand. "Mom," Noah said, louder now. His eyes were wide, scared. "We need to leave. Now!" Something in his voice, urgency, real fear, made me look around. And that's when I noticed it. The way Martin was gripping the side of the table, his knuckles white, his face flushing a dangerous shade of red. I dropped Noah's hand and moved. By the time I reached Martin, he was gasping, slumping forward. The room went silent, save for the sound of Diane's glass shattering on the floor. Someone screamed. Someone else fumbled with their phone. 10 minutes later, the ambulance pulled into the driveway, lights strobing against the white siding. No one could have predicted it. At least, that's what they would all say later. The paramedics worked quickly, but the house had already shifted into chaos. Diane sobbed in the corner, clutching a wine glass so tightly it snapped in her hand. Darren hovered uselessly near the door, barking orders at no one. A few relatives I barely knew whispered furiously near the fireplace. Noah clung to my side, wide-eyed, taking everything in. I knelt down and pressed my hands to his cheeks. "You okay, buddy?" He nodded, but his voice was small. "Mom, it's not over." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He shook his head, tears threatening. "It's not just him." Before I could ask more, Darren snapped, "Helen, can you do something useful and get Noah out of here?" "The adults are handling it." The words stung more than they should have, not because of what he said, but because of what he didn't. "No, are you okay?" "No, thank you for helping." Just that same simmering resentment he wore like a second skin. I led Noah out to the porch, letting the cool evening air hit my face. Across the street, a few neighbors had come out, drawn by the flashing lights. I waved awkwardly. They looked away. 10 minutes later, the ambulance left, Martin inside. The party didn't end, exactly. It just decayed. People lingered, drinking and murmuring, unwilling to be the first to break the false sense of normalcy. I stood alone on the porch, watching as Darren rejoined the others, without a glance at me. "I want to go home," Noah whispered. "We will," I said. "Soon." Inside, I could hear Diane's voice rising. This wasn't supposed to happen tonight. This was supposed to be perfect. Someone else, a cousin maybe, murmured something soothing. And then I heard another voice, low and sharp. Darren's. She never should have been here. It took me a second to realize he meant me. I tightened my hand around Noah's. Later, after most of the guests had drifted away and Diane was being consoled by her oldest son, Darren finally reappeared. "We're leaving," he said briskly, as if it had been his decision all along. The drive home was silent. Noah fell asleep with his head against the window. I stared out into the night, trying not to think, trying not to ask the questions that clawed at the edges of my mind. Why had Noah been so afraid before anything happened? Why had Darren looked at me like I'd ruined something sacred? And why did I have the awful crawling feeling that Martin's collapse wasn't an accident at all? The next morning, I woke to find Darren already gone. No note, no call, not even a text. It was a Saturday, no work to hide behind. But I didn't bother asking where he went. I knew the rules by now. Darren did what he wanted, when he wanted, and I was expected to be grateful he came home at all. I made pancakes for Noah, though I barely touched mine. My mind kept replaying the party. Diane's snide comments, Darren's cold stare, Noah's frantic hand tugging mine, and Martin, slumped, gasping, falling. It didn't fit. Martin was the strongest one in that family, retired after 30 years in construction without a single major injury, never smoked, ran 3 miles every morning at 5 a.m. He was the type to lecture others about their blood pressure, their cholesterol, and yet he was the one carted away on a stretcher. Noah was unusually quiet. After breakfast, he sat at the kitchen table, drawing furiously. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and crouched beside him. "What's on your mind, buddy?" He hesitated, then slid the paper toward me. It was a crayon sketch, simple, childlike, but chilling. Our family at the party, balloons, cake, smiling faces. But above it all, dark storm clouds. And something else. Tiny, jagged shapes near Martin. Sharp lines, like thorns. "It didn't feel right," Noah whispered. "It felt wrong. Before he fell. Like everything was pretending to be happy, but underneath it was all sharp." I kissed the top of his head, trying not to cry. He saw more than he should. Always had. Around noon, Darren returned, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the frames. He smelled like stale coffee and something sharp. Maybe anger, maybe regret. Without looking at me, he said, "Martin's stable." "That's good," I said carefully. "Did they say what caused it?" He shrugged out of his jacket. "Heart attack, they think. Stress." "Stress from what?" He shot me a look. "Don't start." "I'm not starting anything. I'm just asking. Maybe if you focused more on this family and less on your paranoia, you'd understand." There it was. The flick of the blade, delivered with a smile. I didn't argue. I never won those battles. But inside, something hardened. Later that afternoon, while Darren showered, his phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. I shouldn't have looked. I know that. But I did. It was a text from Diane. "You need to get her under control. If she talks to Martin, we're all screwed." The air left my lungs. All screwed? What were they hiding? And why was I the threat? I should have let it go. I should have tucked the knowledge into some deep, dark corner of my mind and left it there. Let the tide of my life, messy as it was, carry me along. But that text from Diane clung to me like a burr. If she talks to Martin, we're all screwed. What could Martin possibly say that would destroy them? That afternoon, while Darren was busy fixing something in the garage, I called the hospital. I didn't pretend to be family. I didn't lie. I simply asked, "How is Martin doing?" The nurse, distracted and rushed, said, "He's stable. Visitor hours start at 3. Family only, technically." "Thank you," I said, heart hammering. At 2:30, I packed Noah into the car and drove across town. The hospital was a bland building, all beige walls and chemical smells. I hated it instantly. At the reception desk, I hesitated, then gave my maiden name instead of Darren's last name. It was a small act of rebellion, a way to step outside the cage I'd been living in. The woman barely glanced up. Room 412, third floor. When we entered, Martin was sitting up, pale but alert, fiddling with the remote. His eyes lit up when he saw Noah. Well, would you look at that? My favorite nephew. Noah smiled shyly and offered him a crayon drawing he'd made, a tree with balloons tied to the branches. Martin looked at me over Noah's head. His smile faded. "Wasn't expecting you," he said softly. "I needed to see you," I said. "Needed to know you're okay." He nodded slowly. "I'm breathing. That's something." Noah sat quietly in the corner, coloring. I pulled a chair closer to Martin's bedside. "Martin," I said, lowering my voice, "what happened that night?" His fingers twitched against the blanket. Bad luck. That's not what it felt like. He didn't meet my eyes. Sometimes life just... You don't have to lie, I said quietly. Not to me. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, in a voice so low I had to lean in to hear, he whispered, "I found something out. About the pension." I frowned. "The pension?" He nodded. They were supposed to surprise me with some big speech, some announcement about the bonus, but I overheard Darren and Diane talking the night before. Half of it's gone. They used it. My stomach dropped. Used it. For investments. Dumb ones. Darren swore he'd double it before retirement. Lost almost everything. They planned to distract me with the party and paperwork. Get me to sign without looking. My mouth went dry. "And you were going to confront them?" He smiled grimly. "Was going to, but someone slipped something into my drink before I could." I stared at him. "It wasn't just stress," he said. "I know it." In the corner, Noah shifted in his chair, looking at us with big, solemn eyes. Martin reached for my hand. "I'm telling you because you're the only one I trust," he said. "But be careful, Helen. They don't forgive disloyalty, not in this family." My pulse thundered in my ears. Outside, a nurse's voice paged overhead, oblivious to the world that had just cracked open at my feet. The drive home from the hospital felt different. Heavy. Noah sat quietly in the back seat, tracing shapes on the fogged-up window. I gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary. Every turn, every stop sign felt like a decision I couldn't undo. When we got home, Darren's car was already in the driveway. I hadn't planned to tell him about visiting Martin. Not yet. Not until I had a plan. But my face must have given something away, because the moment I walked through the door, Darren looked up from the couch and said, "Where were you?" "Out," I said simply. "With Noah?" "Yes." He stood up. "You went to see him, didn't you?" I didn't answer. "You think you're clever?" His voice was low, almost mocking. "You think you're going to get a gold star for snooping around where you don't belong?" I moved toward the kitchen, refusing to take the bait. He followed. "Let me guess. Martin played the victim. Told you some sob story?" I pulled a glass from the cabinet, filled it with water to keep my hands busy. "He told me the truth." "And you believed him?" "God, you're pathetic." Noah peeked around the corner. His eyes darted between us, nervous. I kept my voice calm. "Maybe you should be more careful about what you say when you think no one's listening." Darren's face changed. Subtle, but unmistakable. That flash of panic. He masked it quickly with a sneer. "You're not going to ruin this family." "I'm not the one who did." He took a step closer. I held my ground. "We've worked too hard to keep everything together," he said. You start digging, you'll destroy more than you realize. I think you've already done that. He smiled. A slow, ugly thing. You really think anyone's going to believe you? After everything? He didn't wait for a response, just grabbed his jacket and slammed the door behind him. The house shook from the force of it. I sank into a chair, hands trembling. Noah crawled into my lap without a word. I wrapped my arms around him and buried my face in his hair. He smelled like crayons and shampoo and safety. For now. That night, after Noah was asleep, I sat at the kitchen table and made a list. Martin's pension, gone. Darren and Diane, complicit. The party, not a celebration, but a cover-up. Martin's collapse, not an accident. And now me, sitting on information dangerous enough to make me a target. I stared at the paper until the words blurred. Across the room, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. The message was short. Stop asking questions. You're putting your son at risk. I read it twice before the fear kicked in. They weren't just threatening me. They were threatening Noah. The lines were drawn now, and I knew, if I wanted to protect my son, I couldn't just expose the truth. I had to survive it first. The next morning, I dropped Noah off at school like nothing was wrong. I waved to his teacher, smiled at the other parents, pretended I wasn't memorizing every license plate in the parking lot. When I got home, I pulled out a notebook and began to organize everything I knew. Dates, conversations, photos. But I needed more. Martin's trust was powerful, but it wasn't proof. I needed documents. I needed something they couldn't explain away. That afternoon, while Darren was still at work, I drove to Diane's house. I knew her habits. She went to yoga every Wednesday at noon. Sure enough, her SUV was gone. The spare key still sat taped behind the fake rock by the porch. I told myself I wasn't breaking in. I wasn't stealing. I was protecting my son. Inside, the house smelled like lemon cleaner and something colder underneath, like old lies. I moved quickly, den, office, filing cabinet. Most drawers were locked, but the bottom one wasn't. Inside, buried under stacks of junk mail, was a slim folder labeled retirement. I opened it with shaking hands. Inside, contracts, investment records, account balances. One document caught my eye. A transfer form dated 6 months ago, authorizing the movement of Martin's pension funds into a private account, one controlled solely by Darren and Diane. No signature from Martin, only a forged one. I took photos of every page. Heart pounding. Then I heard it. A door slamming outside. Panic surged through me. I shoved the folder back, smoothed the papers, grabbed my purse, and slipped out the back door, just as Diane's car pulled into the driveway. I crouched behind the hedges, heart hammering, as she hauled grocery bags inside, phone pressed to her ear. "No, I'm not worried," she was saying. "Helen's not stupid enough to cross us. She knows what'll happen if she does." I stayed there until her voice faded. Then I ran. That night, after Noah went to bed, I uploaded everything to a flash drive and hid it in the lining of my purse. Then I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the blank walls, wondering if I had just signed my own death warrant. At midnight, Darren came home. He didn't speak to me, didn't even look at me, just grabbed a beer and sank into the couch. I stayed in the kitchen, quiet, waiting, watching, planning, because I knew, once they realized what I had, there'd be no more warnings. Only war. The morning after I hid the flash drive, everything felt different, colder, sharper, like the house itself was holding its breath. Noah was unusually clingy, refusing to let me leave his side as I packed his lunch. Every slam of the door, every rumble of a passing truck made me flinch. By noon, the decision was made. I couldn't stay passive any longer. I called Martin from a burner phone I bought at a gas station. "I have proof," I whispered. But I need help. His voice was strained but strong. Come to the hospital, tonight. We agreed on a time, late enough that visiting hours were over, but early enough to avoid notice. I packed a backpack for Noah with snacks, games, a blanket. I would drop him at Colleen's house, one of the few neighbors I still trusted. It was almost perfect. Almost. At 5:30 p.m., while buckling Noah into his booster seat, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. I looked up, and my stomach dropped. Diane's car. She parked at the curb like she owned the street, stepping out in high heels and a too bright smile. "Helen!" she called out. "Can we talk?" I forced my face into a mask of politeness. "Now's not a good time." Her smile didn't falter. "Won't take long." She moved closer. I could smell her perfume. Too sweet, almost nauseating. "I know you've been confused," she said smoothly. "This whole situation's been stressful, for all of us." I kept my hand on the car door, between her and Noah. "If you have something to say it." Her eyes sharpened. "You're upset, understandable, but you're also emotional, vulnerable. You don't want to make things worse for Noah, do you?" It wasn't a question. It was a threat, dressed up in silk and sugar. My blood boiled. "Stay away from my son," I said, voice low and lethal. Diane tilted her head, mock sympathetic. "Then stay away from things you don't understand." Without waiting for a response, she turned and sauntered back to her car. I watched her until she disappeared down the street, my heart pounding so loudly it drowned out everything else. I knew then, tonight was my only chance. We dropped Noah at Colleen's with a flimsy excuse about errands. I hugged him longer than necessary, breathing in the safe, warm smell of him. Then I drove to the hospital. Martin was waiting in a wheelchair by the emergency exit, looking thinner, paler. We moved fast. He slid into the passenger seat, clutching a canvas bag. "What's in there?" I asked as I pulled out of the lot. "Insurance," he said grimly. "Just in case." 20 minutes later, we sat in a run-down diner off the highway, 2 cups of cold coffee between us. I pulled out the flash drive. Martin pulled out a battered manila envelope. Inside, copies of emails, financial statements. A will revision Darren had pressured Martin into signing 6 months ago, granting Darren control of Martin's estate if anything happened. "It's bigger than the pension," Martin said, voice hollow. "They wanted it all. Land, house, savings, everything. They were bleeding me dry," he whispered. "And when I started asking questions, they panicked." I stared at the stack of evidence between us. Enough to bury them. But only if we survived long enough to use it. The plan was simple. Martin would contact a lawyer he trusted. Someone completely outside the family's circle. Someone who didn't owe Darren or Diane any favors. I would stay low, stay quiet, and protect Noah until the case was built strong enough to take to the authorities. But simple plans don't survive long around people like Darren and Diane. The next afternoon, I picked Noah up from school early. Something in my gut, the same warning that had tugged at me that night at the party, told me not to wait. We were halfway down the street when I noticed the black sedan in the rearview mirror. It followed us for 6 blocks, then 7. I didn't go home. Instead, I drove to a public library, parked near the entrance, and grabbed Noah's hand. "Adventure time," I whispered. He nodded solemnly, trusting me without question. Inside, I watched from the windows. The car circled once, then parked across the street. Someone inside, watching, waiting. I didn't have proof it was Darren or Diane, but I didn't need it. I could feel it. The walls were closing in. That evening, Martin called. "They know," he said without preamble. "They know we met." "How?" I asked. "I don't know, but they do. I heard from a nurse friend. Diane's been snooping around, asking about visitor logs. My heart sank. We agreed to meet again, one last time. Somewhere safe, somewhere neutral. The church on Glenwood Avenue. Abandoned years ago. Quiet, isolated. Perfect. Or so we thought. When I pulled into the cracked, overgrown lot, the first thing I noticed was the silence. No cars, no lights, just the setting sun bleeding through the broken windows. Martin stood near the entrance, his face tense. I parked and got out, clutching the flash drive like a talisman. We exchanged no words, just nodded. Inside, the church smelled of mold and dust and old sorrow. Martin led the way to what had once been the sanctuary. We sat on opposite sides of a long-forgotten pew, sorting documents, double-checking files. And then, footsteps. Not ours. Heavy. Purposeful. Martin froze. I tucked the flash drive into my boot. The footsteps grew louder, closer. Then a voice, Darren's, echoed through the hollowed space. "You just couldn't let it go, could you?" I turned. Darren stood in the doorway, hands loose at his sides. Diane beside him, arms crossed, mouth twisted in disdain. Behind them, two men I didn't recognize. Bigger, meaner looking. I rose slowly. "It's over," Darren said, almost kindly. "Just hand it over. Nobody needs to get hurt." Martin stood too, swaying slightly. "You've already hurt enough people?" Diane laughed, a brittle, ugly sound. "Don't be dramatic, it's just business." Martin looked at me, and I knew what he was about to do. He stepped between me and Darren, raised his voice. "You want it? Come and get it." The two men moved forward. Everything happened at once. Martin shoved a pile of loose papers into the air, scattering them like confetti. I ran. Out a side door, down crumbling steps, into the twilight. I didn't look back. I didn't have time. The flash drive pressed against my ankle, a painful reminder of what was at stake. I just ran. And behind me, faint but unmistakable, I heard Martin's voice shouting, and then a sickening thud. I didn't stop. I couldn't. For Noah. For Martin. For the truth. I drove with shaking hands, heart pounding against my ribs so hard it hurt. I didn't go home. I didn't call anyone. I just drove. To nowhere. To somewhere that wasn't marked on a map. To a place where I could think. At a gas station outside town, I pulled into a corner space and turned off the engine. I sat there, staring into the dark, replaying everything. Martin's face, Darren's voice, the sickening sound of violence I couldn't stop. I wanted to sob. I wanted to scream. But there was no time for either. I opened the glove box and retrieved the burner phone. No missed calls. I texted Colleen one word. "Safe?" Almost immediately, she answered, "Yes." "Noah's asleep. We're okay." Relief made me dizzy. I tucked the phone away and pulled out the flash drive. It was small, light, ordinary looking, yet it held the weight of an entire family's corruption. A family that had smiled at me, toasted glasses with me, hugged me at Christmas. A family that would have let me, and my son, disappear if it meant protecting their lies. I needed to make a move before they did. I drove to the only place I could think of, the local news station. It wasn't a big operation, just a squat building with flickering neon lights and cracked windows. But it was real, and it had cameras. I parked 2 blocks away and walked in through the front entrance, clutching the flash drive like a lifeline. The receptionist looked up, startled. "I need to see someone," I said. "A reporter. Anyone." Maybe it was something in my face, or maybe she sensed the urgency, but she didn't argue. She picked up a phone, murmured a few words, and waved me through. A man met me in the hallway, tall, rumpled, with kind eyes. "I'm Ben Keller," he said. "Investigative team." "What's going on?" I handed him the flash drive. "I have proof of fraud," I said. "Forgery, abuse of power, and someone's already been hurt trying to keep it quiet." Ben didn't blink. "Come with me," he said. We spent the next 2 hours in a small conference room, me talking, him taking notes. He clicked through the documents one by one, his expression growing darker by the minute. "They're going to come after you," he said finally. "They already have. Are you ready for this?" I thought of Noah's face, of Martin's voice, raspy and determined. "You're the only one I trust." "Yes," I said. "I'm ready." Ben promised to start making calls immediately. Legal counsel, protective services, police liaisons. The full weight of exposure would be in motion by morning. Walking back to my car, I half expected Darren to step out from the shadows, for Diane to lunge at me with her manicured hands curled into claws. But the night stayed quiet. Still, when I got home, I locked every door, every window. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the silent walls, feeling like the world was tilting off its axis. At 2:34 a.m., my phone buzzed again. A private number. No text this time, just a photo. Martin, bruised, bloodied, alive, but barely. And a message beneath it. Last chance. Walk away, or we finish what we started. I clutched the phone, breathing hard. Tears stung my eyes. But underneath the fear, underneath the heartbreak, there was something else. Something harder. Hotter. Rage. They had underestimated me from the beginning, because they thought I would stay quiet. But they were wrong. Morning broke heavy and gray, as if the sky itself knew what was coming. By 9 a.m., the story was live. Not just a news article, but a full televised segment. Ben had moved fast, securing interviews with financial experts, lawyers, even whistleblowers from Darren's old investment groups. The evidence I handed over had been enough to spark a firestorm. By 10 a.m., police cars were pulling into Diane's driveway. By 10:15, Darren was unavailable for comment. By 10:30, Diane was escorted into a squad car, face twisted with rage, screaming that she was set up. I watched it unfold on a grainy TV screen at Colleen's house, Noah sitting on my lap. He didn't understand everything, but he understood enough. He understood that the bad people were finally getting what they deserved. That his mom hadn't let them win. That afternoon, a detective visited me, not just to thank me for the evidence, but to tell me they had found Martin. Alive. Beaten badly, dehydrated, but hidden in an abandoned farmhouse Darren used to hunt on. "He's asking for you," the officer said. I drove straight there, heart hammering. When I entered the hospital room, Martin looked up, one eye nearly swollen shut, his hand bruised and shaking. But he smiled. "You made it," he rasped. I took his hand carefully. "Number, we made it." Tears blurred my vision, but I blinked them back. I needed to stay strong, for both of us. Authorities pieced the rest together over the following days. Darren and Diane had siphoned money for years. From Martin, from other family members. Even from elderly clients Darren once managed investments for. The collapse at their retirement party had been their last desperate attempt to push through forged paperwork before Martin could question anything. And when I didn't stay quiet, they panicked, turned violent, exposed themselves. They hadn't counted on me. On the woman they all whispered about behind fake smiles. On the mother they called too soft to ever stand up. They had underestimated me, and it cost them everything. 2 weeks later, sitting in the courtroom, I watched Darren and Diane be formally charged. Fraud, conspiracy, attempted murder. The judge denied them bail. Their faces, so smug once, were now pale and hollowed by fear. I didn't feel joy watching them fall. I didn't feel vengeance. I felt free. Afterward, I took Noah to the small park down the street. We sat on the swings, the wind soft against our faces. "Are we safe now?" he asked quietly. I wrapped my arm around him. "We're safer," I said. and we're stronger. He leaned his head against my side, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I let myself breathe. Really breathe. The weight of secrets, the fear, the anger. It slipped off me like an old torn coat I would never wear again. We stayed there until the sun set, until the sky turned purple and gold, until the world felt clean again. And when we finally stood to leave, Noah grabbed my hand, held it tightly. And this time, it wasn't fear that made him cling to me. It was love. It was trust. It was the unbreakable bond between a mother and a son who had faced the worst and won, together.